Nobody who worked the front desk of the Alderton Hotel got there by accident. You had to want it. The early shifts and the late ones. The guests who couldn't find their keys. The guests who blamed you for the weather. The guests who treated the desk like a complaint window, and you liked the glass. You had to want the work itself. The solving of small problems under pressure. The memory for names. The ability to hold a calm face when someone was handing you their worst day and expecting you to absorb it without flinching. Celestine Ware had worked the Alderton's front desk for 12 years. She was 52 years old. She wore her hair pulled back and her blazer pressed. She had a way of looking at a guest, level, unhurried, with a quality of attention that made people feel, briefly, as if the whole hotel had been waiting specifically for them. That the Aldertons, general manager, a quiet man named Gerald Finch, had tried more than once to describe in a training memo and never quite managed to capture. The guests noticed it. They noticed it the way you notice good light in a room without being able to say exactly what changed. Guests who were regulars, and the Alderton had many, the kind of mid-range business travelers who cycled through the same 4 hotels in the same 4 cities every quarter and knew the desk staff by name, had a habit of relaxing visibly when they saw Celestine behind the counter. There was a particular woman, a project manager named Ruth, who came through every 6 weeks, who once told the restaurant hostess that checking in with Celestine felt like setting down a bag she'd been carrying since the airport. The hostess had agreed. She'd been watching Celestine work for 3 years, and couldn't put it better than that. None of them had ever asked themselves what it cost Celestine to be that for them. Harlan Voss had been a guest at the Alderton for 9 of Celestine's 12 years. He was a regional account director for a plastics distributor, and he came through on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of every month. Always the same room type, always the same parking validation, always the same complaint about the coffee in the executive lounge being lukewarm. He was not a cruel man in any dramatic sense. He did not raise his voice. He did not use language that would have given HR a clear handhold. What he did was something quieter and more habitual than cruelty. He treated Celestine's warmth as a service he was entitled to, the same way he was entitled to the parking validation and the room on the 4th floor. In 9 years, he had learned it. It was printed on her badge. It was on the welcome card, slid under his door. It appeared on every receipt. He simply did not use it. When other guests said, "Good morning, Celestine," he said, "I have a reservation." When she greeted him by name, and she always did, because she remembered every regular, because that was who she was, he answered her information with requests. He did not look up from his phone while she processed his check-in. He corrected her, once in front of a full lobby, when the system had flagged his loyalty points for an audit, and she had explained it plainly and politely. He had spoken over her to ask for her supervisor, looked at the supervisor, and accepted the exact same explanation Celestine had just given him, as if she hadn't spoken at all. The lobby had gone a little quiet that day, and then the lobby had moved on because lobbies do. The 2nd Tuesday of June, Harlan Voss arrived at the Alderton at 4:17 in the afternoon. The lobby was running at a particular kind of midweek business, 3 guests at the desk and 2 more waiting, and Celestine was working the counter with her colleague, a younger man named Darnell, who'd been at the Alderton for 2 years, and watched Celestine the way a student watches a teacher who doesn't know they reteaching. Voss came through the glass doors, phone in hand, rolling bag behind him, and he stepped into her line without looking at the other line, the way he always did. Celestine had processed his check-in perhaps 200 times. She knew his loyalty number. She knew he wanted a high floor, east-facing, away from the elevator. She knew he would ask about the lounge coffee as if it were a personal failing of hers. She looked at him when he reached the counter. She said, "Welcome back to the Alderton. I'll get you checked in." Harlan Voss held out his phone with his loyalty barcode displayed, not to her, exactly, but in her general direction, the way you hold out a ticket to a scanner. He did not look up. And then he said what he'd been saying in some variation for 9 years. To her, across this counter, "Just make it quick, I've got calls." Nothing dramatic happened. The sky did not darken. The lobby did not hush. Darnell, 2 feet to her left, kept typing. The guest at his window asked a question about checkout time. Celestine Ware processed Harlan Voss's check-in. She found his reservation. She confirmed the room. She coded his keys and slid them across in the small paper sleeve. She gave him the information he needed: floor, direction, lounge hours. She did all of it correctly and efficiently, and without a single error. And she did not smile at him. She had smiled at every guest before him. She would smile at every guest after him. But for those 2 minutes and 14 seconds, Darnell checked the desk clock later. He wasn't sure why. Celestine Ware's face held a composure so precise it was its own kind of statement, the kind that required no words and left no handhold. Voss took his keys. He left. Ruth Okafor, the project manager who came through every 6 weeks, was sitting in the lobby chairs, waiting for a colleague. She had checked in 20 minutes earlier, and she had been half reading her email and half watching the desk, the way you watch something you've always trusted and want to make sure is still. All right, she had seen all of it. She sat with it for a moment. Then she put her phone in her bag. A man named Theodore Page, 61, a semi-retired civil engineer, who stayed at the Alderton 4 or 5 times a year when his consulting work brought him through, had been waiting for the elevator. He had also been watching. He and Ruth did not know each other. He pressed the button for his floor, and the doors closed, and he stood in the elevator going up, and he thought about what he had just seen, and what he had probably been seeing for longer than today, without putting a name to it. By 5:40 that evening, 3 separate guests had found Gerald Finch. Ruth came to the front office and asked, quietly and without theater, whether she could speak to the manager about something she'd observed at the desk. Theodore Page left a note with the restaurant hostess, a folded piece of paper with his room number on it, and asked if Mr. Finch could call him at his convenience. A third guest, a woman named Patrice, who had been waiting in line behind Voss, sent a message through the hotel's digital concierge portal. She described what she had seen in plain, careful language. She described what she had been watching, she wrote, for the past several visits. Gerald Finch read the portal message first. Then he spoke with Ruth. Then he called Theodore's room. He was a thoughtful man, Gerald Finch. He had managed the Alderton for 6 years, and he was not the kind of manager who moved fast on the first version of a story. He pulled the desk log for the day. He looked at the timestamp on Voss's check-in. He walked out to the front desk when the evening wave had slowed and stood beside Celestine, not summoning her to his office, not making a thing of it, and asked how her shift was going. Fine, she said. Celestine. He waited until she looked at him. He was 60 years old, and he had the look of a man choosing his next words with some care. I had some guests come to me today. She held his gaze. Not about any error, he said. Nothing like that. I know, she said. It came out quietly. Just 2 words. And they landed with the weight of 9 years. Gerald Finch stayed at the counter for another 10 minutes. He didn't pepper her with questions or ask her to perform distress for him. He asked if she was all right. He told her what he intended to do in the morning, which was to call Harlan Voss into the small meeting room off the lobby and have a direct conversation with him about the Alderton standards for guest conduct, both ways. He told her that the hotel's account relationship with Voss's company was going to be reviewed and that he would be contacting their travel manager directly. He told her, and he meant it plainly and without ceremony, that 12 years of what she brought to that desk was not invisible to him, even when it might have seemed that way. Celestine Ware did not cry. She was not that kind of woman, or rather, she was not that kind of woman at work, and she was professional enough to know the difference. She thanked him. She went back to the line of arriving guests. But Darnell, who was still at the adjacent window, heard the last of it, and he made a decision about who he wanted to be when he grew into this work that he never quite put into words, but never forgot. Harlan Voss came down to breakfast at 7:15 the next morning, the way he always did. Gerald Finch met him before he reached the restaurant. The conversation in the meeting room off the lobby lasted 14 minutes. What was said in it stayed in it. That was how Finch ran things, but what followed was a matter of record. Voss's corporate account was suspended, pending a review with his company's travel manager. The Alderton's director of guest services sent a formal note to the account holder, outlining the hotel's conduct standards and the specific incident that had prompted the review. It was factual, and it was thorough, and it did not editorialize. Voss checked out that morning without visiting the front desk. That afternoon, Gerald Finch placed a letter in Celestine Ware's permanent personnel file. It was a formal written commendation. It named the specific qualities, the consistency, the professionalism, the standard of care she maintained across 12 years, and it was signed by Finch and by the Alderton's regional director, whom Finch had called the previous evening, A copy went to HR. A copy went to Celestine. She read it in the break room during the 15-minute gap between the morning rush and the midday arrivals. She folded it. She put it in her bag. She went back to the desk. Ruth Okafor was checking out, rolling her bag toward the exit. She slowed when she reached the counter, and she looked at Celestine, not with pity, and not with the complicated guilt of someone who knows they watched a thing happen for too long before they said anything, though Ruth carried a version of that guilt and would sit with it on the plane home. She looked at her the way you look at someone you have decided to actually see. "Have a good trip," Celestine said. "You too," said Ruth. And then, "Thank you for being here every time." It was a small thing to say. It was an ordinary thing. Celestine Ware looked at her, level, unhurried, with that quality of attention. And she smiled. Not the smile that was part of the job, not the one she gave to every transaction, the professional warmth she'd given freely, and at cost for 12 years to people who mostly received it without thinking about what it meant that it was being given. This was a different thing, quieter and more real and belonging entirely to her. The lobby did not applaud. No one made a speech. Theodore Page, passing through with his rolling bag on the way to the door, caught her eye and gave her a single nod, the kind between people who have understood something about the same moment and do not need to discuss it further. Darnell at the window beside her kept his eyes on his screen, but his shoulders had changed. Celestine turned to the next guest. She had a name, and she used it. She had a desk, and she knew every inch of it. She had 12 years in this lobby, and 12 more ahead of her if she wanted them, and a letter in her bag that said plainly, in the language of record and institution, what she had always known and been waiting, without quite knowing she was waiting, for someone in authority to say out loud. The day went on. The Aldertons' front doors opened and closed, and every guest who walked through them that afternoon would check in with Celestine Ware and go away with that particular feeling. The one the manager had tried to put into words and couldn't quite, the one Ruth had called, setting down a bag you'd been carrying since the airport. And not one of them would be able to say exactly what it was. Only she knew what it was, and on that particular afternoon, for the first time in a long time, she let herself feel it.